So welcome everyone to Poets in Conversation. I'm Phyllis Klein, and tonight we have two very special poets, Karen Petersen and Melissa Green. I was lucky that Karen learned about my reading on Facebook and wrote to tell me about Melissa and how we should invite her to read with us. Perhaps we'll get to hear more about how they connected, and we'll definitely be seeing and hearing the end result of that invitation. Our reading tonight has its roots in poetry about travel, grief and loss, the snapping of a Ticonderoga pencil, and so much more. So as I usually do, I'm going to start with a poem of mine. And because one of the themes of our reading tonight is grief and loss, I seem to be a specialist on that. So I picked this poem to read. And it's dedicated to a mentor and friend of mine, Jack Riddle, a wonderful poet in Michigan. Phlebotomy. He introduces himself just before the needle. My name is Rodell, he says, after my dead brother, Rodelio. I offer my arm and the blood slips into his vials, too needed this time. My brother died at 3 months, he says, 50 years ago in the Philippines, my only brother. I don't usually watch the red liquid from my body course into the tube. Today, I want to see it fill up the ampules that will bear it to the lab. Is it thick as the blood between these Asian brothers? I ask him, was there a reason he told me this today? How he couldn't have known about you. You're also lost, brother, the poem you sent me just an hour before. Your brother dead in the womb so many years ago. The brothers neither of you would ever have. Both of you only sons. Rodell 30, you past 70. How the two of you became friends through my blood. My blood on the way to the lab, coagulated into numbers of discovery, useful information, possible hope. Your brother's hemoglobin in your bodies forever. Blood brothers. Stories of possibility lost in the dirt of death. Sports never played, careers never found. No teaching how to throw a ball, how to lose your homework. How you both live on in their shade, their voices whispering about what could have been. My blood on the way to its future. All blood transfused with the ways of our losses, our passage. Thank you. Okay, so now I'll introduce Karen. Karen Petersen has had a diverse career in writing. Reporter, editor, poet, and short story writer. She is now working on finishing up a nonfiction book set in Thailand and Myanmar that focuses on her adventures in tracking down the king of the opium trade. Wow. Her overseas journalism gave her all sorts of material for her literary endeavors, and her published poetry and stories can be found on her website, KarenPetersenWriter.com. Nominated for various prizes, in 2013, she moved from New York City to Santa Fe. She has 3 volumes of poetry forthcoming, and they're called 12 Cities and Other Places, The Habits of a Landscape, and trembling. And Karen enjoys playing video games, eating good food, and being in wild places. Like what wild places could that be? And now, Karen, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you so much.
That was a powerful poem, Phyllis, that you read.
Oh, thank you.
I just wanted to say before I start, I came across Phyllis with this book, which is a very clever sort of breakdown of how a newspaper is structured, and she put poems in each of the sections, and it actually won the Eric Hoffer Award. Anyway, and this is Melissa's latest book, Magpiety, which is difficult to find, but hopefully will be reissued. Quite wonderful. And we'll get into, I think, later with Phyllis how I met Melissa and so forth. So to begin, I'll read a section of poems from my manuscript, 12 Cities and Other Places. This is called Monte Carlo. No recollection of how I'd arrived in Monaco. I was just suddenly there, among the palm trees and huge, immaculate floral displays. It was a Sunday, and the lunch seating at the Grand Louis XV in the Hotel de Paris was filled with people wearing impeccable suits whose flawless manners could cover all sins. I was diminished in the huge gold frames of the room, a small person among the vast wealth, an American log cabin dweller loitering. Even the amuse-bouche did not amuse, since I needed to feel at home, relaxed, in order to enjoy the sumptuous food of the great Alain Ducasse. Perhaps I had become too casual in my casual American life, and no longer could rise to the carefully guarded and gilded lifestyle of statesmen and kings. A Romanian playboy sent over a waiter to tell me my lunch was paid for, and when I left, it was clear he expected sex. Only he'd been Sean Connery. So I bolted into the elegant Casino de Monte Carlo, where fearsome doormen guarded entry. A gamine smile and promise of a short visit got me inside to walk in awe under the chandelier's precocious lighting. Its understated diffusion overlooking Le Haut Mond's endless evenings of opulent intimacy, where losing €500,000 on baccarat was done with a casual shrug and an order for another magnum of champagne. Ferraris and other exotics slowly cruised the narrow streets. It was hard to imagine the Monaco Grand Prix here with its sophisticated Formula One belligerents. The whole place felt lazy and indulgent, perfect for buying an ice cream for the cost of a dinner back home, each lick about $1. I needed to get away from all the emperors in their beautifully tailored suits of Egyptian cotton and the gawking tourists in their wrinkled ones. What to do? Onward to Italy or back to Nice? Italy would have to wait until another time. My bourgeois stomach was craving a good bouillabaisse and some drinks at the bar with the Russian mafia, arrivistes who had bought up half the Riviera. But that's another story. This is from a small series called Some Northern Italian Wanderings that I'd like to expand into a book. Florence. These days, Rome was for the imperialists, Florence for the artists, the sensualists, the indulgent, with its serenity of structure and architectural harmony. The nuns there at the medieval Santa Maria di Novella, a church with the oldest pharmacy in Europe, made a local alkermes the amorous Catullus would have loved. The first day of record heat and humidity, I took 3 showers and still got a bad heat rash I couldn't translate for the pharmacist. So I ate a lot of gelato to cool off and gained a few pounds. Later, the gorgeous statue of David just stared at me, lips pursed. Tu grassa donna americana, he seemed to be thinking, looking away woefully towards the entrance to the Uffizi. The portraits there, brilliantly mounted around the ceiling perimeter, looked down, like a room full of people saying hello. And I felt I knew many of them, or had met them before, long ago in another lifetime. This was a country of lifetimes. Called Corsica, from a group I wrote called A French Quartet. Like a small love letter dried paper thin from the winds of the ancient Mediterranean, a bougainvillea leaf drifts down from the cloudless sky and falls on the table. Nearby, a beautiful woman tosses her hair impatiently. The trees of the maquis shift in the breeze, while the old men, their faces impassive, tend to their cheeses and charcuterie with hard, black, bird-like stares. Unbending, eternal, this is the land of the vendetta, stiletto, the slow passage of time, birth, death, the centuries of life. If church bells at noon, the melodic rhythm of their notes back and forth like a cradle under the deep blue Corsican sky. The wind rolls in like a tide carrying the buzzing of the cicadas, the relentless beat of a hall clock counting down the brittle hours. But history can beguile. For me, there is only the heaviness of the sun and its heat, stilling all my thought and action, the deep silence of the mountains, scented air of rosemary and myrtle, the drunken bees in dizzying spirals. Munich. It was a nice Hilton and cold outside. The Autobahn ride from the airport had been appropriately terrifying. The BMW taxi driver going full speed on the empty highway, flying past the infernal yellow halos of watchful street lamps. I went down early to the sauna and coming back next door to my room, saw the handsome gentleman, also from the sauna, going inside, and glances were exchanged. Then he knocked, ever so discreetly, on our connecting door. And why not, I thought. So champagne, strawberries, and decent sex later, I went back to my room and slept soundly. It was my first time in Germany, and not a bad introduction. Wandering the ancient Marienplatz the next day, I bought a hand-knit, expensive sweater made of iridescent green yarn, a magical thing, which enabled me to peer through the veil of time, fawn-like, and see the old Germans on the street for the horror of what they had been and what they had become. Remembering the terrifying children's cover of Der Struwwelpeter, no wonder everyone was so screwed up, given what kinds of images were in their heads. I ended up at the site of the '72 Olympics massacre, sadness still rippling through the surrounding stoic stones, witness to so much. The raucous beer hall that night provided no escape. Could only recall the beer hall putsch of 1923 and all that followed. Too much history. And yet, there was a redemption the day I left, when I arrived at the sublime Glyptothek, repository of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture, transcendent in the light of the arched windows, calling to a higher realm of purity and beauty, whose spirit could not fail to be moved. There, the caged animal was freed, the darkness overcome. This is Egyptian Elegy. The trip had always been about seeing that cat, and of course the pyramids it seemed to guard. So my first day in Cairo, I rented a driver and rushed out to see the Great Sphinx of Giza, that guardian of the lower Nile and all therein. It did not disappoint, in spite of the giggling Japanese tourists surrounding it for photos as if they just found a giant Maneki Neko. Carved into the limestone bedrock of the plateau, the Sphinx dated back to around 2500 BC, to the Old Kingdom, where, in contemplation, one realized quickly that very little in Egypt was really new. I wanted to ride a camel and pretend I was T.E. Lawrence, So a Bedouin rented me one with buck teeth and impossibly long legs, like an ungainly rocket, but it was no smooth ride, the great braying tasseled beast lurching about like a drunken sailor, nearly tossing me off into the fiercely hot desert sands. Back in town, the bumper car circus ride insanity of the Zamalek traffic circle nearly stopped my heart, but I made it to a busy cafe for a cup of gawam hulwa and a few puffs on a nargile in the afternoon sun, while contemplating Rimbaud's graffiti on a far wall. That night, the great belly dancer Nadia Fuad, who danced for sultans and kings, danced in a small venue high atop one of the best hotels in town. Her hips seduced every man in the room, and a few women too. But my journey in this great teeming crossroads had ended, and I headed south that night on a sleeper train, passing through time and centuries in the dark, to arrive and walk among the staggering columns of Luxor, and wander in the desert in the Valley of the Kings, to observe the familiar hieroglyphic themes of birth and death written on the tomb walls below those shifting sands, and to see, not as an initiate, but as a stranger waiting to be led down to the sleeping sarcophagi deep in the earth, surrounded by a blue ceiling of stars and guarded by Osiris in that quiet space of eternity for all to bear witness. But then to walk back up that shadowed tunnel toward the light, toward the entrance where the birth of that person was first recorded, was to experience one's own rebirth and transformation as one stepped from the dark into the blinding light of the desert, the blinding light of life, vibrant and gleaming in an intense blue sky. Oh, Egypt. This is a poem from the part two section of the book, 12 Cities and Other Places, which is a series called Wampanoag, the Place of Shells, which is the Native American name for Long Island. That section opens with the British being defeated, and this particular poem is near the end of this part two. It's called Long Island Part Two. I carry a small green town in my head with its avenues of oak trees and the smell of salt air blowing inland. It is an innocent picture. I ask myself, not understanding the power of provincialism, why did I return? Not for the clammy humidity, the familial local clannishness, the hurricanes sent by angry deities, or the leaves rotting like epaulets in the stench of history. Where is the window I can look from that frames my life? Do I see the salt marshes of Long Island, timeless savannas of Africa, the refrain of the gamelan, or the wine-dark sea? See all and none. Home is where the heart is, maybe, but home is so much more. My heart was in all those places, my home, none. But the bay feels like home now, its sluggish inlets with their tidal draw, the salt air charged with humidity. Although I'm not home until the train door opens and I smell that salty breeze, hear the language of the breaking waves, the buzzing cicadas with their symphony to summer, echoes of my childhood's lost innocence. Feathered reeds rustle and bend in the wind by the marsh where the old 18th century bridge takes me from one colonial town to the next. There are less birds these days, their melodies a dying language amid the endless lawns and sprinklers, like hissing ghosts everywhere. That hissing is the noise of people's lives, their anger rooted in boredom and small petty things, their unconscious disenchantment eating them alive while they slowly turn into mulch. for the church cemeteries. I remember the small red berries of the native honeysuckles growing by the side of the sandy roads, the stone church almost hidden in the rushes, with its peaceful cemetery just before the bridge over the marshes. I was baptized there, an Episcopalian, by my Scotch-Canadian mother. She'd insisted because its quaintness had reminded her of the orderly countryside of Europe in a confused American landscape of architectural mishmash. The priest had looked at me strangely. My mother thought it was because I must have misbehaved in the pews, but I hadn't. It was because he knew I saw him clearly for what he was, with that kind of piercing truth that only children possess. He was exposed. His spiritual exhaustion was exposed, and he wanted me gone. Time, which gnawed voraciously on the simple bronze reliefs of the church doors, had exhausted him. Bored, angry, or lost parishioners had exhausted him. Loneliness had exhausted him. The sacristy was no longer profound nor exotic. He exhaled its atmosphere like incense, and the aspergillum ritual had become annoying. Only the marsh water could anoint him now. The ceiling angels frowned, but I was baptized anyway, and he retired a month later. Soon there was nothing left of him but an etched name on the wall, which after repeated assaults of the salt air during hurricane season, quickly became indecipherable. Here in the bay are generations of waves, generations of seagrass, the tolerant sands ebbing and flowing with the tides. Here is the amen of calm waters, where my father's ashes are in the sea, my mother's on a bookshelf, each apropos. And so I came back, eventually, like some ancient horseshoe crab, which had been dumped in Times Square, out of its element. But this was no second birth, no renaissance. It was a reckoning. Echo ego mentior, here I lie, obstreperous as a great South Bay fisherman with a few beers in him, out in a storm, seaweed swishing from the bucking stern, a memento mori to defiance. The shimmering road, those rustling dry rushes, the midsummer bay whose breaking siren waves have lulled my angry soul home, will all comfort and soothe me now. And as witness, a giant snapping turtle creeps out from the reeds and stubbornly sits in the road to sing to me of this heaven, this land. And it's a heaven I have no faith in, but worship nonetheless. And finally, a couple of poems from another book called The Habits of a Landscape. A little different in tone, really come from my influences with Irish and Welsh poetry. This is called A Vacation in Wales After the War. It was all glowing pink, purple, and green on the small hills above the house today, the heather and gorse almost on fire with their fierce wind-spangled colors. Geese overhead at dawn, charms of goldfinches in the privet, the far summits standing clear. We had a fast sunlit race across the moors, cloud shadows flowing over the fells, swallows hunting low through the flower meadows. As I ran across the old chalk finish line behind my brother, no longer small, but all grown now, a man in full, I stumbled and he gathered me up, safe and unhurt, as if I was still a young girl. To be surrounded by family and unfettered landscape today was a kind of bountiful perfection and gave some peace amid the clattering and hammering of my troubled dreams, hiding away in a far-off place. Finally, this is called The Long Night's Moon Has Come. The Native Americans have a name for the full moon of each month, and in December, one of the names is the Long Night's Moon. I wander the world dwelling in one dark blue eventide after another, frequenting mountains, caves, forests, and other lonely places. Hunting sparrowhawks send small birds shattering out of branches and into the mouths of waiting foxes. Sometimes the sky brightly glitters in parts, while being ominously dark in others, often foretelling storm, rain, or snow, fine wind-driven snow, disorienting and obscuring the northern stars so I lose my way, or dog's feet snow, falling in large flakes, quickly blanketing the landscape and freezing even the shadows under the trees. I look sunward to feel its warmth on my face, its apricity, and remember the shimmering eldritch mirages of the brutal heat in the southern latitudes, destroying all equilibrium and sanity. I just want to close my eyes and sleep now, or else shout my regrets at the lone skylark riding the currents of all that emptiness. And then there is this moon, glowing and round, strong light flowing like a river through the night sky, a giant portal to the heavens. I lean back, conquered, defenseless, surrendered in full, completely subsumed until that delicate pink blush above the horizon arrives with its beautiful wild edges. That's it.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. That was just a beautiful, beautiful reading. Wow.
Thank you.
As you read that, was there a poem that one that you read that really stood out for you, or um, how did it feel?
Not really. I mean, life is so multifaceted, so I mean, I like The Long Night's Moon Has Come, just for the language. Um, some of
Can
the
you
earlier city poems.
I'm sorry.
No, just some of the earlier city poems for some of the commentary.
Hmm. That, yeah. So the Long Night's Moon is about it's about Long Island. Is that right?
No,
Oh,
no, it's
I'm sorry. I thought you had said something about native language. Was that a different poem or?
okay. So the Long Island poem comes from part two of 12 Cities and Other Places.
Oh, okay.
And part two, basically a chapbook called Wampanoag, the Place of Shells, which is the Native American word for Long Island.
I see. Okay.
So they're not related, other than the Long Night's Moon is also a Native American name for the full moon each month. They have different words, the wolf moon, other,
Mm-hmm.
other ones.
Yeah. Well, why don't we bring Melissa in too and talk a little bit? Um, I'd love to have you join us, Melissa. Can you unmute?
Am I
There you are.
unmuted?
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah.
Okay, here I am. Thank you, Karen. It was a beautiful reading. You have this exquisite capacity to go from the sophisticated city dwellers. There's a certain gaze among city dwellers that you have, and you show us. You can give it to us that way, and then you some of the poems, the gaze is so quietly on nature and in nature and from nature. And I just felt you had embraced the entire world that way, just from your gaze. So thank you. It was really a beautiful reading. And I read the poems again before we came here tonight, and they just read so beautifully. So thank
Thanks,
you.
Melissa.
Yeah, I
Thank
I
you.
agree. completely. And when you were reading the travel poems, a couple of things. It appears that you were traveling by yourself. Um, yeah, and
was actually I was actually on assignment a lot of those cities doing,
I see.
photojournalism and journalism, and this was recalled years later as poems.
That was one of my questions. Yeah, it just it, so you wrote them years later. It was just so evocative of the different places and that the feeling of being on your own traveling like that. Um, and
Well,
some of the
I wrote them last year during COVID because I thought I'd read some of them before at other readings last year here in Santa Fe, because I thought it was a way of people armchair traveling, in a literary way and just enjoying
mhm,
something different, the grimness that was around us and still is to some
mhm.
degree. Um,
And yeah, you just captured the essence of what it was like for you in such a beautiful way, and brought that to us. As I wrote in the chat, it's like a travelogue of poetry.
yeah.
So thank you so much.
And so much history. You hit all the bases.
Yeah, really. Wow. Okay. Well, I'll
Does
shift
anyone
gears
ask-
now. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
No, I just was saying, does anyone want to ask any questions?
Well, let's wait until after Melissa reads, and then we'll open it up for questions for both of you. Yeah. Um, so I'll introduce Melissa. Excuse me. Melissa Green's first book, The Squanicook Ecologues, published by W. Norton, won the Norma Farber First Book Award from the Poetry Society of America and the Lavin Award from the Academy of American Poets. She has published 2 other books of poetry, 52 and Magpiety, New and Selected Poems from Arrowsmith Press. Also 2 memoirs. And she has recently finished a novel based on the life of Eloise and Abelard. Melissa is also a fabric artist and makes embroidered quilts and wall hangings. She lived for many years by the sea and now lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. And so, Melissa,
Thank you.
I'll turn it
That
over
was-
to you. You're
Okay,
welcome.
thank you, Phyllis. And thank you, Karen. That was it's a hard act to follow. I wanted to say, first of all, my books are out of print. That's just the way things happened. So I guess Phyllis will tell you later how to at least get your eyes on some of the poems. This was I call this my orphan book, although there's no reason for me to think so because it got a lot of attention at the time, but this is called 52. And I wrote it when I was 52 years old. And I think there are 52 poems. And that's just the name of the book. And when I was writing this book, we're going to talk about healing a little bit later. When I was writing this book, I had gone through 2 surgeries on my foot, and I was walking around the house with an IV pole and my lettuce drawers full of antibiotics, great big bags. It took me all day to pump myself full of medicine. So when I had been a classical sort of poet. My lines were long. There was a lot of rhyming. There was a lot of stanzas. And when I started to write this poem with my arm in the IV, I started to write a poem, and it was rococo and very high level. And I got to a point after 2.5 lines, and I heard this crack of a Ticonderoga pencil. And I realized that I had 2 surgeries on my foot, but that my poetic foot had also changed. I couldn't write the way I had written before, or not only that way. So the poems I'm going to be reading from 52 are 2.5 lines with a very deep caesura, and then 2.5 more lines. And it's a form if it's a form at all, it's one I invented because I couldn't write the way I had written before. So I'll read 2.5 lines and I'll pause, so you know that's the caesura, and then I'll read the rest of the other 2.5 lines. So this is about writing. It's called Routine. Tundra of the white page, steps of emptiness and ice. Equipped with crampons and picks, I notch out a poem on nice, frostbitten, winded, afraid to die. Between the typescript's wides and rattles, soft nostrilled animals of meaning poke inquisitive noses through caesuras, enjambments, metaphor to me. I lift a seraph, duck under, and enter the world. This one is ostensibly about Mary Magdalene, excuse me. And there are those old sages who think that after Jesus died, Mary Magdalene went to Egypt and became an eremite and lived in the desert until she died. Imitation. Ravaged Magdalene, forgiven, long fingered by God to wander raggedly, discalced and sun-stunned in the desert, weighed down by her hot Khamsin sculpted hair. What hubris to think Donatello knew me. I'm housebound, heavier than I've ever been, wholly immobilized, shorn, sealed in a seaside town deluged with storms since spring. But the spirit, of ironwood, rain carved, starved into a tense, attenuated beauty. This is called A Salt Box in Vermont. Wood stove, 2 desks, kissing, books, the latest in a series of sunset-colored dogs, our tall sons, their stair-step children stamping off snow, the holiday table groaning with our work, vegetables, poetry, merriment. It never happened. The house, the oeuvre, the husband holding me older. Illness married me, first and forever. put me to bed like a bad child. Daily, through rain's quicksilver, I count on an abacus of crows. At the steps of the Widener Library, a girl my age laughs nearby, fresh from skiing in Zermatt, casual in her beauty, orthodonture, years of good breeding. Harvard Yard is milling with history, ideas, students garbed in confidence and cashmere. I stand unenrolled, smarts not trumping class. I type at Toyota of Boston to keep my bed in a halfway house for the mentally ill. In my one good dress, I cross this compass rose for the bus, lacerated with light. Some of the poems, there's a rocking motion too, where the first three lines have a certain pitch and sound, and the second bunch of lines have another, they sort of dip. So I hope you can hear the difference. Nebuchadnezzar was a king who sent the Jews into exile in Babylonia, and he knocked down Solomon's temple. And when he was older, again, the old sages say, he was under an enchantment and went on all fours to eat the grass with his cows. This is called a story. Pre-Raphaelite hair, a little black dress, and fuck me pumps. My poems drawing actors, dancers, painters to my village digs, books, opera tickets, the Met. Someone else is getting the life I thought I'd get. When I whistle, a white horse in Central Park lifts its head, wickering. I lie down like Nebuchadnezzar to graze, my lips kissing a subway grate 200 miles away, years too late. A forelock whisks my cheek. The word Philosoph or Thalassa, I'm never sure how to pronounce it. Marcia, you would know. It's the spirit of the sea. The first balmy day. Winter undid me. I practiced in my dress of lime and ash, being lost in the ossuary of the cosmos, anonymous as Micah, left for dead. Suddenly a sprightly nurse, some insistent Deirdre, bustles the windows up, the foam's aroma blowing in, surf-roiled rocks like skulls in a tidal catacomb tumble at dawn and wake me. I long to wade once in the sea with numinous Thalassa, washing morning clean. I write in here about a Selkie. A Selkie, it's not clear whether she was a seal woman or a woman seal, but in the Celtic pantheon of enchanted creatures, she was in the sea. She was a seal who would come up onto the land and slip out of her coat and become a woman. And if you wanted to catch her and keep her as your wife, you would steal her coat and hide it so she could not go back to the sea. And that always broke my heart. I thought that was a terrible story. And I also write about Primavera. I was thinking of Botticelli's great many-paneled, many-figured spring. It just means spring in Italian, but it's that beautiful, those beautiful figures dressed in leaves. And gambling is just dancing or running around and playing as children do. Ephemera. Dolphins fan the Selkie's hair. A nightingale's tremolo turns to amber, in which a dragonfly wipes her eye, in which Primavera's maidens gambol. Here's how I walk with my cane on broken concrete, with carious teeth and barking with laughter, scarified, shrunken, childless, shaking, cruel. The eater of paper, the drinker of ink. With my pen point, I dig up the watermark, a white peony soft on my tongue. In that sweet wafer, I taste a cluster of birches, cherry, oak. I swallow acres of forest, seed pods like limpets at my heart. The nib plunges into a black current. Its unguent on my lips. I suck down the streets of Evangeline, the drowned parishes of Katrina. These lines, an alphabet drawn from a corpse's single alchemized hair. The first book I read when I was a kid, not a great story, but I was Daddy Longlegs. And I thought, this was the greatest thing ever, that you could write a book and be dead for 100 years. And somebody could go into the public library and find your book on the shelf and find you, even though you'd been dead for 100 years. I thought, this is great. I never have to die. I didn't understand about things like, who knew that there'd be no libraries anymore? They'd just be the internet. So anyway, I very carefully always knew that I was going to be somewhere between Graves and Hardy. And I just thought that was the best thing ever. This is called Library. Ballast, all my books, making me earth fast. Each a clearing, a glade, a birch grove, where goddesses, governesses, girls like me frolic forever. Somewhere between Graves and Hardy I'd hide, breathless to be read. Pages, only panes of glass, unloved worlds denied me, touching the seraph's suffering as my own. Fingers on lips, a kiss's underside, On each flyleaf, an M, my mark, a minim, a half note, a half life, the fiction of me. In Florida. Did I tell you I sat on my sister's porch in a hammock swing, watching the evening cardinals weave her cherry laurel into a net of ribboned carmine silk, convinced I'd live my life alone? I saw Eros rise over the osiers, fletching an arrow filched from Artemis's quiver, and half lifted up, only to meet his barb of laughter. I sit back. First dusk comes on, then darkness, then the underworld. This is called Love in an Irish Family. Orphaned, unmarried, childless. No term for the worst of it, to be blackened by them, losing so the young ones I cuddled and read to, the beaten flesh I kissed, blood's deep music. I am unsistered now, unbrothered. I'll live. You've taken the East and the West from me. In the heartbeat between dawn and day, the sun and moon you've also taken. In the breath between dusk and dark, you've taken God from me, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, that's all from 52. I have 3 poems to read from, oh, what's this? Ask to unmute, what's this? Sorry, somebody's, there it is. I have 3 poems to read from Magpiety. I loved stories about myth. I think I read more Ovid than I read fairy tales, which was saying a lot. I read Ovid backwards and forwards and frontwards, and all those metamorphoses just thrilled me. I think I was hoping that someday I would be metamorphosed too. So the first one I'm going to read is from Letta. Letta was approached by and raped by Zeus in the form of a swan. And there are some stories that say she laid 2 eggs. One was with Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra. That's quite a pair of twins. And then the other pair of twins were Castor and Pollux. So this is when Letta is an old woman. And when I say that night, I refer to the night that she was raped by Zeus. Letta, later. Remind me, my bed is empty. My graying hair pinned up and tumbling from a starfish clip, where once a waterfall by Crivelli flowed over the white shoulders of Sparta. I do not quarrel with my warring children. Their bad marriages are their own affairs. I sit on the rocks and watch the waves, my toes now horny as a tortoise's. That night, the storm came off the sea. I saw St. Elmo's fire electrify the spars, and a bluish current quivered on my skin. I studied my egg-shaped oval in the glass, breath like a wing beat in my throat, wind tearing white curtains, my flesh and feathers on my bed in flight. I'm an old woman writing poetry. I never wanted intimacy with goddesses and gods, never wanted their dangerous progeny. I only dreamt of passion, possession, surrendering to the torque of human love. This is called Daphne in Mourning, and Daphne was chased madly by the god Apollo, and she was fighting him off and screaming to her father, a river god. She was a nymph, a river god, to please turn her into a bay tree, and he did. And so the laurel tree was sacred to Apollo ever after that. This is for my friend Carol Moldow. Daphne in Mourning. Palm fronds have woven out the sky. Fog has infiltrated every vein. My hair has interlaced with vines. Cobwebs lash their gauze across my eyes. I've stood so since the world began and turned almost to stone some years ago. Who passes by perceives a lichened post, my girlish features ghostly, nearly gone. My bark is warmer than the dead's. Human blood still lulls the underside of leaves. My fingers hold the very dress I loved to dance in when dancing mattered, and it did. This is a poem called Casualty. It's dedicated to my friend David Ferry. Casualty. They carried him from the sea on his shield, his greaves gushing what he thought were golden fish. He did not know the ones who bore him, nor which of Poseidon's horses frothed at their bits. Asclepius rolled back his white sleeves. There was incarnadine clouding the water, gouts of blood on the sandals of the stretcher bearers. There was nothing to be done. They carried him across the moors, the mossy stones, Actium, Ardennes, Bannockburn, Borodino. Along the marshy bank, the footpath rising up, Bosworth Field, Bull Run, Crécy. Over the starlight daisies in the field grass of the vineyard, Damascus, Da Nang, Dresden, Dunkirk, beside the ivied trees under the theater of the moon. They carried him through the shady groves of the Great Plains, Gallipoli, Hiroshima, Jerusalem, Kabul, the murmuring of cypresses urging them on, Kandahar, Kaysan, Leipzig, My Lai, the stretcher bearers printing the clay of Asia Minor, Nanking, Persepolis, Phnom Penh, Poitiers, through the tree trunks where the trail dissolved, the siege of Acre, the siege of Austerlitz, the mud now frozen ruts on mountainsides, the siege of Leningrad, Sarajevo, Solferino. They followed the snowy lanes through sleepy villages, Verdun, Vukovar, Wounded Knee. They carried him under the rustling live oaks, cross over the river, and rest in the shade of elm and yews, the blue-gray mists of Shiloh drenching every decomposing grave. Thank you very much.
Oh, let's all unmute now and give these two poets a big round of applause.
That's beautiful.
I can barely breathe.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow. Right.
exactly.
That
Yeah.
last one, real powerful.
Thank
Yeah.
It
you.
was wonderful. It was great.
Thank you, Eddie. Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you.
So that last one, to me, the name, the repeating of the names like that. I don't know if you meant it that way, but it's kind of like the dirge. It's like the march, the funeral march, the procession. I mean to say.
And the whole time that the two Greek stretcher bearers are carrying this one dead soldier from the water, and it goes through all of history like that, through all of the it's the same men doing the same work.
Wow. Wow. Well, so I've been thinking about how we have this conversation. There's so much wealth and richness and beauty, and I don't know. I've just been feeling so many different emotions with both of your readings tonight. So, so I would like to open it up to the audience to see if people have specific questions or comments that you'd like to make. I'm happy to ask questions and make comments as well. But you know, I think that we have such a wonderful audience, and so many people are here who are also writers. So let's see if anyone has something you'd like to ask, either one or both of our poets, and then yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on how brilliant Melissa's work is. So visceral and really deeply moving. It's tremendous, and I'm so glad that you agreed to read. It was wonderful to hear it.
Well, thanks for chasing me down.
Oh yeah, why don't you talk about that a little bit more while people are gathering their
Well, I'll just say from my point of view,
yeah.
I don't go to Facebook all the time, but every once in a while I'll go, and I kept seeing somebody was looking at my page. Somebody was looking at my page. 5 people were looking at my page. 16 people were looking at my page. And I kept saying, what is going on? Nobody looks at my page. Who is looking at my page? And the number kept going up and up and up and up. And I thought, this is the strangest thing I've ever seen. And then Karen wrote to me and said, oh, by the way, I'm a poet and I'm all excited. And could we read together? And she was just full of helium about the whole thing. She was just delighted. She couldn't wait until we could read together. And then she told me about Phyllis, and she told me about your reading series. And so how could I say no?
Yeah, really. That's how I felt too. Yeah. I got an email from Karen just saying, wow, what a great idea. You should invite these people to read. And you were one of them. So I wrote back to Karen and said, well, yeah, why don't you see if you can get a hold of someone and then you can read too. And so then of course for all of our benefit, she was able to get in touch with you. And that
Well, I found out about Melissa because I had read late in life the work of Derek Walcott, and through that connection, I found out that she had been mentored by both Walcott and Joseph Brodsky, and was considered really one of the great poets of her generation. And I just thought it was fantastic to be able to have this connection to the past. Walcott, and Brodsky both are gone now. So when I originally contacted her, it was such a pleasure that she responded, because many poets now can't be bothered and get very annoyed. So it was really lovely to be able to make contact with her.
yeah.
I don't bark. I'm not that kind of dog.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so if people are feeling shy about speaking, it's okay also to put questions in the chat and I'll read them. And we can ask them that way. So I always am so impressed by some of the lines that people that we hear as someone's reading. So, the having it in front of you to read with your eyes and then hearing a poem at a reading, it's two really different experiences, and both are really beautiful. So, so let's see, Karen, as you were reading, there was a few things in the chat. One, a few quotes from the lines. The amused bouche did not amuse. Do you want to say something about that?
Oh no, I tried to with some of those city poems have wry comments or other observations that would be interesting. So, and Monaco's a high-end place that I wanted to write about it with an element of sarcasm or commentary.
You know what I found so interesting in your work is the tones, the different tones. It's like you were playing this wonderful instrument that had different pitches and different tones and it made me feel like this was a whole person speaking, really a whole and a generous hearted and a funny and I mean, you just had so many prism. It was like a prism. You had so many facets to you. It was wonderful to catch all those tones.
Great, thanks.
And also the range of the different subjects and subject matter and emotional depth and breadth of what you're writing about. I was so impressed with that as well. There was a longer poem that you read, and I actually don't think I have a copy of that, but if you would speak a little bit about that, Karen, I'd really like that. Do you know which one I mean?
The Long Island one?
Since I don't have a copy of it in front of me, I don't remember the title.
About Egypt?
No, it was right after the travel poems. There's kind of a change in mood.
I think, pardon me, I think it may have been the Long Island poem. That was, I think, the longest of Karen's.
Okay, all right, then that's it, yeah. Yeah, can you speak a little bit about that one? Thanks, David.
Well, it's interesting hearing Melissa read and reflecting on my own reading. For me, a number of my poems, in addition to dealing with loss, I didn't read many of those, or any of them really this time, but it's also about a search for belonging and home. And
Yeah.
the Wampanoag, the Place of Shells chapbook, is a reflection really on my life on Long Island mostly, and how now that I've moved to Santa Fe, how I reflect back on what I miss about it, and what resonates in me as important
Mhm.
from there. So that particular poem, which is near the ending of that chapbook, is a reflection on, it sort of pulls together a number of the poems that preceded it. And it's just a reflection on my search and how I feel that really is where my center is in many ways, even though I'm not there.
Mm. And that was just so beautifully expressed, and that emotional tug that, that when you hear or read a really great poem, that it gets you in the gut like that. I felt
Well,
that way.
that's the way I felt about Melissa's poem, the last stanza where she said, "Illness married me." I mean,
Oh,
those
absolutely.
lines there after that are just killer. They punch in the gut. They're really incredible.
Absolutely. Hmm. And that, I think maybe we're all kind of feeling just like that astonishment of hearing all that, and it's kind of renders us speechless in a way. Just one heartbreak after another. That
Yeah.
so beautiful, though. So Bradley says, "Abacus of Crows struck me." Oh yes, I agree. Do you want to say something about that, Melissa?
Oh, I find it hard to talk about my poems after I've read them, because I think hearing poems when you don't have them in front of you, I think I applaud you all, because I think that's one of the hardest things to do when you don't see them, and your ear is so tuned to what the reader is speaking about, that if you can catch anything like Abacus of Crows, I really applaud you, because I think it's very difficult. Abacus of Crows, I just looking out my window, what did you see? It was every day, it was like counting. It was like a prisoner making marks on the wall, and every day it was the same thing, making marks on the wall to say how long I've been here. And so each crow is like a mark on the wall,
Mm.
the prison wall.
Well, I have a little thought I could share, or sort of question from Melissa, and it actually sort of picks up on this notion that she was just, what she was just talking about, pardon me, in terms of listening, and not reading at the same time. So near the beginning of your group of poems, if I have written this down correctly, you have the phrase, "Lift a seraph, duck under and enter the world," which I thought was a wonderful way of conceiving, at least in my response to it, the relationship between one's own private work and how that work, and maybe one, you with it, or we with our work, enter the world or meet the outside. But the listening, where the listening bit business came in, is that later on you have this phrase, "a seraph's suffering," and I thought, oh, okay, there's another evocation of the work of the seraph. But then I also heard that as an SERAPH apostrophe.
Oh, a seraph.
And
Oh,
I wondered, is that a new thought? Have I just made up this pun or what? Because I thought that was pretty
no,
terrific.
I honestly, I did not. You caught the pun before I did. I did not.
Mm.
That was not a pun I had in mind. So thank you very much.
You're
Now
welcome.
I can use it. Oh boy.
Right, exactly. You identify the typography with the divinity or something like that. That was
Mm.
terrific. Okay, that's my thought. But thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that, David. There's a question actually from Perry in the chat for Karen. And I have to, I'm not sure, there's a typo in here. So it says, what to her? Maybe
think
Perry,
you meant
maybe you
what-
could say,
what
Say
drew me
it.
to all the different cities,
Oh,
the
what
search
drew
I
you?
spoke
Okay.
about journalism. I responded to her directly by saying journalism assignments, but that's actually too flip because I often picked assignments based on my own need to be in certain places and find out about them. So, I mean, I really like Melissa's use of, Greek and Roman mythologies because I studied classics in college, Greek and Latin, and I really, really had to get to Egypt and to Italy. I haven't made it to Greece yet. That's why I was asking about Crete earlier to one of the participants. But it was important to me to kind of witness these things and experience the presence of them, as they survive through the centuries and have them transform me. I think, I mean, my first time in Europe was late in life, and it was incredible for me to see the cobblestones on the streets of Paris, to feel that history under my feet. So journalism was a vehicle for me to really get to see the world in a way that I wanted to.
Yeah.
So envious.
Yeah, it sounds
Well,
very exciting. It probably was harrowing too, but
Yes, I'm sure. True.
yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that at all, Karen? Or
oh, well, you come back with a full-blown case of PTSD, and when you're walking down the streets of New York and a cab screeches or hits the horn, you jump or you fall on the pavement, it has its side effects. Great.
wow.
But on the other hand, you learn humility and you get a perspective on the world when you see so much suffering.
Right.
Difficult to kind of go back to the ambitious swing of, the New York journalism and literati scene. It's you have to keep perspective.
Yeah. Well, Stan is right on top of where I was going to go, actually. But let's see what Marcia says. Melissa counting out the days with crows. Christopher Smart counting out his days with lets and fours in Jubilati Agno. So I'm not familiar with that.
You know the poem that the Jeffrey, for my cat Jeffrey.
Yeah, Jeffrey. Yes.
So that's just a minor not a minor fragment, but it's just a fragment of the Jubilate Agno, let us praise the Lamb. He was locked up for being insane, although Samuel Johnson said, they say he doesn't like clean lawn, something like his laundry is not clean, mine is not either. But he wrote something that was a mystery for a long time because it was a very long manuscript, and it came down to us incomplete, and it was finally figured out that this was a call and response. Let something for something, and it's no one knows for sure, but it's sort of determined that this was something he did daily to keep track, just to keep himself within himself. So anyway, that's what I thought of when, sort of a minor thing, but I think there's a connection there about finding something within the writing just to keep track of things, of days and times. I'm sorry, I'm not being very coherent.
No,
and I realize
you're right on. Thank you for Marcia. That's really, I will never not remember that. That's a beautiful connection. Thank you.
Oh, we've got a lot going on here in the chat, so I'll read some of the comments, and then I want to make sure that I don't forget to talk more about the healing power of poetry and writing. And we have a few people here who might want to join in on that. So Mary Marcia says, I heard a transformation happening in the works of both poets very powerful, yes, perspective. And Claire says, exceptional poets and beautifully measured readings. I wonder if Melissa and Karen knew ahead of time which of their poems they'd each be reading today. Yes, they did. They have such unique, distinct voices, yet there was a sense of something akin to contrapuntal music taking shape in the space between them, as if they were co-creating something together too today.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. Thank
I-
you, Claire. Holy mackerel. That's something. We didn't know we were going to do that.
Yeah. Wow. And then Bradley says Karen's travel poems about places I visited connected so strongly with my memories that I feel I can trust the pictures she draws of unfamiliar places.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a certain truth to it. It feels so true that you can trust it. That's a really wonderful point.
That's probably my journalism training, actually, the way you step back and look at things. You know, you find a balance between observation and emotion.
So isn't it true? It's kind of like, nothing, even if you're not doing something anymore, it's still with you. Yeah. And nothing is ever wasted. I guess I like to think of it that way.
Someday I hope Karen and I can sit down and talk about the difference between the language one uses as a poet and the language one uses as a journalist.
Can we come and listen to that too?
If you'll invite us, Phyllis will be back next week.
Oh, wow. I'd love to. We'll talk. Yeah. So, there's so much more. Let's see. Well, I did want to say I looked at some of excerpts from your memoir, Linen, at Melissa, and there were some things in there that you've already talked about in writing 52. And then you also were talking about how you approach writing at writing poetry. And I don't know if this has changed since you when did you write Linen? Was that a while ago or?
The Linen Way I wrote in
Linen.
2013.
Okay. All right. Uh-huh. So the Linen Way, sorry.
That's
Yeah, but when you say when I'm inspired to write and know my subject or can feel my way toward its parameters, it requires almost literally a physical act of concentration, of weighing in the scale pans I use for language, one word over another, counting without an identifiable gauge the weight of the sound of the word, the weight of its visual values. How does the word look near other words I've chosen in the line? Is there anything in a particular word that would add to its indispensability in the line, i.e., in itself? Is there an echo with other words near it, as in rhyme, off rhyme, I rhyme, homonym, the whole damned bag of nails? Well, that's just so amazing. So I feel like, there's smoke coming out of my brain just thinking about all that. And so you must go into such amazing places of concentration, or I wonder, is that what happens? Or
Yes, I was born with straight hair, and it doesn't stay straight. It just curls because I'm concentrating so hard.
wow. Yeah. I mean, wow. And then having teachers like Derek Walcott, who, I don't know, it sounds from what I read like he could be rather intimidating. I don't know, but
He was fierce in some ways. He was quite ferocious, but it was because he couldn't bear laziness, and he couldn't bear sort of a casual approach to language, because to him language and love were the most important things on the planet. And if you were going to be a writer, damn it, you had to not take yourself seriously, take the language seriously. You
Mhm.
couldn't just I'm losing my language now. You
Mhm.
couldn't just be so casual about it. You had to take it
Right.
seriously.
Yeah, it sounds like he adored you, and that it was mutual, and that and that he wanted to he wanted you to give your best, and he really pushed you in that way.
He
So
did.
yeah.
It's
Hmm.
true. He wouldn't let me write poetry at the beginning, at first 6 months that I knew him. He just said, "You're gonna go home and you're gonna write strict botanical prose." And he was quite ferocious about it. And so I had to write prose for months
Yeah. Wow.
because he thought
Well,
I had a lot of bad habits, and I did.
yeah, boy. Well, I know you've so many stories about him and your other teachers, Joseph Brodsky for one, and I kind of so I don't know. I really could we could go so many different directions. And there's more in the chat as well. Thank you, Karen and Melissa, for memorable reading. For Melissa, you mentioned that you changed style from more formal learning to a 5-line invented nonce form. Am I saying that right? What could you do in this new style that you couldn't in your earlier style? And similarly, what constraints did you experience with the new style that didn't exist before?
Oh,
That's a
I
great
I
question.
it is a great question. I'll try to answer it. I for many years I wrote hexameters, I wrote in consonantal rhymes, I wrote in stanza forms, I wrote in other kinds of forms. I was a classicist and a formalist. And then when I came to write 52, it's like I physiologically couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it. So I had it gave me a whole new voice. My voice changed, and I stopped rhyming, and I heard I always wrote by ear, but I heard things differently after I started writing the broken poems.
Yeah.
I heard on my way to the break. I heard the break before it came, and then I heard the break, and then I heard what came after the break.
Oh. Well, that leads us into, let's spend a little bit of time before we finish on how poetry is healing, because that's, I think, I always, even though that's, my line of work, I find it's hard to talk about in a way. So, but um, I'll tell you how it works for me, and then it seems like, Melissa, what you're talking about is, um, how you took what was happening in your body, and how that forced you in a way. It was the embodiment of something that you could then bring onto into a poem, put onto a piece of paper, and that embodied that on the paper, and then it brings it to us in such a visceral way, that punch of that break that that we feel when we hear unbrothered, unsistered. I mean, it's just um so moving, and so uh it feels so healing to me when and let me continue by saying, for me, there's a way that uh, if there's an image or a thought that I can remember and think about or envision. Um, so just thinking about unbrothered and sister, that could really bring, I don't even know if I'm getting that exactly right, but that brings so much to me in terms of my own history, or just so much loss. And then sometimes it might be an image of hope or something beautiful that we can carry with us, um, that that brings us some resonance or some hopefulness about whatever is troubling us. So um, and then there's the empathic connection that comes with the poet. So I'll stop there. I'd love for other people to say more about how poetry is healing, and then I'll jump back in if you want.
This the time I can ask a question. This is
Yeah.
Mary Marcia.
Yeah.
And just quickly, what I want to know is how closely with your illness and the change in the writing, what was it happening before or was it happening during the struggle of healing, of getting better?
Oh, absolutely right. In a minute, is the same minute. I had to give myself the antibiotics in an IV and sit down and try to write a poem at the same time. And I found that my language was broken as my foot had been ruined and had to have surgery. So it was the exact same minute. And the writing that I did every time I wrote about a heartbreak, and every time I put that break on the page, that worked to heal me. That itself worked to heal me.
And that you were working toward it. It was like the desire to continue writing was there. This amazes me. I mean, I think you joined the desire to keep writing as a desire to keep going, knowing you had a battle. You were in a battle. And when I think about it, a foot is a kind of measure in writing, and you had a broken foot. You had that brokenness, and I'm just really amazed and touched, and the freshness. See, I know you're being very concise. There's certain a certain sound that's so memorable, and you read very clearly, and phrases did come to me, but it sounds so fresh of the moment of breaking out and saying something very true to yourself, even if no one else read it. That's this feeling I get, is there are things that break through that you just need to put down, even if it never gets beyond to readers, but it has. And that's so amazing. And you had said that what you were very easy to listen to and I think latch onto things. And I love Karen's book, but Karen's was harder to latch onto, like Afraid. You almost wanted to gulp a great more of it, and my ear couldn't record enough of it. Fortunately, I'll be able to hear it again. That's all I wanted to say. I'm just really impressed by both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we did a good job. Thank you.
Well, and when
Well,
go ahead, Karen.
one of the things writing about loss or difficulties, it gives you some control over the trauma once you've written it. Gives you a kind of distance and healing that doesn't exist otherwise.
Well, you get it out of you, and you get it out of
Right.
your body. It's sort of getting it out of your body, although it's still there. But then it's on a page, and then you've spoken it, so it gives you power over it. And then, to some extent, anyway, it's an effort to be empowered. That's how I feel about it, anyway. And then when you share it, when you bring it to other people, and then it extends it, so it becomes a connection and a conversation and a lot of compassion and empathy that brings us all of us healing. So
Did you want us to read one of those trauma type poems, or is there not enough time?
Well, yeah, I think we're
No?
going to need to, yeah, we have so much more we could say, but I think maybe what we should do is think about reading a final poem from each of you. And I just want to see if there's any other chats that I want to read or that I should read. So Alex is saying, Karen, I found your travel poems fascinating. I'm guessing that you didn't write about everywhere you ended up visiting. So of those that you wrote about, what was it that moved or inspired you to musing and writing a poem about them?
Actually, it's an entire book. It's about 60, 70 poems. And so most of where I visited, I wrote about with individual poems. And I think I actually answered this early in this event when I talked about last year after I had read Walcott and a lot of his commentary on different places he had been, and it just lit a fire in me to the poems just started coming, and I wrote them all in about 2 weeks of just work, and it just came out of my head, all these memories and things. And I wrote them because I thought it might be a nice thing for people, during hard times or dark days, those February, March days when you'd rather be somewhere else. So that's what I did. I'm shopping that book now.
Yeah,
unsuccessfully.
Yeah, we can't wait till it comes out. Yeah. So how about if we do that? Yeah, let's think about, closing up, and each one of you can read a poem. And we just all are so grateful. I'm so grateful, and I can imagine that everyone here is really grateful for both of you and your wonderful work. And I wish we read all night. So
Okay,
yeah,
I'll go
ahead.
first. This is a poem from my third book that I'm shopping called The book is called Trembling, and it just deals with all different aspects of that, whether it's erotic or disease or love or whatever, the whole range of emotions. But this particular poem deals with one night a couple of years ago when I had been massively overdosed by a doctor without telling me, and I ended up in a huge hypertensive crisis, very close to stroking. And it was in the middle of a horrible blizzard, and I had to get to the hospital because we were looking at like 230 over 130 blood pressure. So you can imagine, I couldn't think straight. It was all I could do to dial 911. So I wrote this maybe about a year later, and it made me feel better. It's called Emergency. Skyrocketing blood pressure, weakening veins, confused thinking, massive headache, trembling, a semi-coherent call to 911. Is this just a run-through, or will it be the end? I see the seriousness on the EMT's faces, although too delirious now to be frightened. I surrender to the rocking of the ambulance, my cradle, its lights flashing red through the blinding snow. Of course, that December night it was a blizzard, the ambulance struggling through the side streets like a drowning animal trying to survive, me chattering mindlessly all the while, unaware of the precipice. Black ice everywhere, whiteout conditions, the driver moving our small, fragile world forward, almost by instinct on the vanished road. Suddenly, there is the hospital, a bunkered sacred fortress on the hill, the castle of my salvation, surrounded by white, bright light everywhere. I wonder, is this the light of death, or is this the light of my redemption? Bears down on me, laser-like, and then there it is. Emergency, in blood red letters, someone rushing over, saying, "You are going to be okay," dissolving me into tears. As I know now, I've held on to my precious life only by a state of grace.
Mm. Wow. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. That was great. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to read a poem called Prophecy. Virginia Woolf believed she was going mad when she heard the birds speaking to her in ancient Greek. In leafy Bloomsbury, the pigeons are straining their collars. They're printing out the rain's alphabet on the cobbles. The muttering in their throats is the sound of water in gutters. Their utterance, the consonants of Aeschylus. Oh, Virginia, the birds. As children, Cassandra and her brother slept the night in Apollo's sanctuary, and at dawn were found entwined by sacred snakes, their tongues flicking the children's ears to clean them, so they could hear especially the voices of animals and birds and understand the divine language of nature. Listen, the pigeons are describing you and predicting your future. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, everybody. And it was really great. And thank you, Karen. And thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Let's do this
Thank you,
every year.
Really? It's a date.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.